Hey, what's up guys? Joel Adams with Iridesium, and I'm back with another pretty cool tutorial. Today we're going to be going back to space. Ever since I started 3D, space is one of those things that I've just always really loved recreating. I finally found a pretty fast, efficient way to create a really cool looking galaxy, so that is what we are going to be doing. I'm going to say right here, it's all going to be done with shaders. So if you don't know how to use the nodes, you might need to, pause the video and copy node setups a couple times because we are going to be moving slightly fast. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, let's jump in and get started. Alright, so let's go ahead and select everything and delete it. I will then go ahead and add in a new cube. Shift A, add mesh and cube. I'm going to hit S, Shift Z, and we'll say 12. That's going to give us this very flat cube, and that's pretty decent because galaxies tend to be a little more flat than round. Then I'm going to go ahead and open a new window here and make this the shader editor. Go to the rendered view. I'm going to switch to cycles, choose the GPU, and make this black. Alt-Shift-Z to turn off all the overlays, and we are good to go. I'm going to start by adding in a principled volume. That way we can Control-Shift-click on it, and it rightfully goes into the volume input on this material output. Set the density here to 0 and the emission strength to 1. Then I'm going to hit Control-T on this principled volume, and we're going to start working on our first sort of group of nodes. Now what we're going to be doing is creating a couple different groups of nodes and then adding them all together to create our galaxy. The first one I am going to do is to make an actual mask that has that sort of spinning shape of the galaxy. So let's move this back here. I'm going to add in a texture, make this a gradient texture, plug that into here, into our emission color right here. Now it looks right, however our scale on this cube is all off. If we go over here, you can see it is, at the Z it's 1, and then it's 12 and 12 on the X and Y. So I'm going to hit Control A, apply the scale. We want to sort of stretch that out. So what you can do is go to this scale and just turn that down a little bit, something like that. And then I'll turn this up a little bit, just so it squishes it a little flatter than the top of this in case we ever wanted to add a sphere in the middle that was real bright. Alright, so we've got this circle, which is correct. I'm going to go ahead and add in a noise texture. And what we can do is we can actually use this to mask our noise texture. So if we plug this right into here and add in a converter, color amp, turn up the contrast, yeah, you can see there's the noise. However, it goes all the way to the edge of the cube, and that's not really what we want. So add in a color, mix RGB, plug that here, set it to multiply, and we can plug this in here. And now you've got this. It's sort of masking our noise texture to create that circle shape. So the next thing we want to do is cause this noise texture to spin. Now, if you think about it, a spin is sort of a circular shape. Fortunately, we happen to have a circle right here. So, if you look at this noise texture, you've got this vector, and this vector is what controls the way this noise texture is mapped. If you'll notice, it's also really squished out. I'm going to go ahead and plug this object into the noise, and it's going to become real small, but if you turn down the size, you can see that it's no longer squished. So the next thing we want to do is we want to keep this noise texture's location as is, but we want to change the rotation of where the noise texture is depending on how far out it is. How can we do that? A mapping node. Let's go ahead and add this right here. We're going to keep this object plugged into the mapping node. Set this all back to 1. Grab your gradient texture and plug that into the rotation. And you've got something going on here. So if we add in a converter math node, set that to multiply, you can turn the strength up to see what exactly is going on. So you can see that the rotation is a little screwed up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a converter and combine XYZ and plug this into the Z value. And hopefully, yeah, that fixed it. It looks more like a galaxy now. So now if you want to change the fall off, for instance, you could add in a power. Just plug that in right here. And then you can change this value to kind of get a different fall off, maybe 2. Something like that looks pretty good. And you're going to want to make sure that you get this math done in the correct order, or it'll kind of look interesting, but not right. So I'm going to pull this all back here and just kind of make this as tight as possible without making it unreadable. Something like that. And that's a pretty good first go. So you can edit this color ramp to sort of edit the contrast before the spin happens. And then you can add in another color ramp out here to edit it after the spin. And that will sort of clip the galaxy a little bit, which can be good. One thing I'm going to do is add in a color mix RGB here, right after this mix RGB. Let's just add in another vector mapping node. I'll plug this into the object as well. Duplicate the gradient texture, plug that in here, and add this here. And then we're going to go ahead and set this to add. So now we have created this real bright sphere at the middle of our galaxy. Set those both to 0.8. And you can see it's higher than the middle as well because of that extra edit we did here at the start, which looks pretty cool. So that is the basic idea. Now what you can do is you can edit this noise texture. I'm kind of liking that. It looks interesting. Then let's make sure that this is more readable. So I'm going to go and let's go to this noise texture, choose color, and I'll set it to red. All the nodes that you're going to want to remember to edit, I'm going to set to red. Another one you might want to edit is this. You can turn up and down the effect of the sphere at the middle. So I'll go ahead and set that. And that's basically it. Let's turn this down even more. I'll go something like that, and then I'll add in a color ramp, set it to B-spline. You can drag that forward, add in a new one, and turn its darkness down, but not all the way. So now we've got all these nodes. Let's select all of them and hit Control J. That's going to kind of add them into one object, so to speak. So you can move it around and do whatever you want, and then if you add in more nodes, you won't get confused by the ridiculous amount of nodes that you have. And you can title this if you want. So you'll notice that this in and of itself looks like a pretty good galaxy. In fact, from a distance, that is completely fine. You would be fine with just using this. However, it's not very detailed, so how are we going to add some detail? The first thing I'm going to do is add some big stars, or maybe they're just small clusters of stars. This already makes up a bunch of the stars. If you would have to zoom in a ridiculous amount to actually see stars, and by the time you got in there, it wouldn't look like stars. However, we do want some bigger, brighter objects floating around. So let's go ahead and make those. I'm going to go texture, add in a Voronoi texture, plug this into our emission color. I'm going to save the file. Then I'm going to add in a converter color ramp and crank this up. And you can see that we've got these like black splotches. It's also very squished, just like all of the textures. So grab your Voronoi texture and hit Control T. You've got stars going on. Now they're a little small. I want the objects to be bigger. So if we crank this down, that should change the scale of the stars. Something like that. Crank that back. If you set this white value to maybe 8, that's going to make them really, really bright. So let's turn the size down even more, just so that we only have really only a few stars. Make them a little smaller. Something like that. Actually, what you could do is set this to constant. Drag the white value all the way over, and then this black flag is all you need to edit. You could use Control-Shift-D, add in a color, mix RGB, add that right here, set it to add, duplicate this, and then turn the scale back up again, and that would add sort of another layer of detail. There would be some bigger stars. Really just get creative, and whatever you do, make sure you don't add too much detail, because when we're rendering this, we're going to want to use the denoise modifier, and if they're too small, it's just going to get rid of them, and it's going to be wasted render time. So now that you've got this is sort of another object. You can hit Control J, then I can go Color, Mix RGB, and mix these two objects, so to speak, together. Just like that. I will set this to multiply, crank that up, and you can see that the stars are now only showing up where that galaxy was. You can then go Color, Mix RGB, and you can sort of mix this object back in again, so something like that, and turn its effect down. I'll choose Add, actually. Flip these and then turn this down, and that's not looking too bad. So now if I was you at this point, I would add in a camera. Let's go Control Alt Numpad 0, zoom in a little bit. So then 128, render this image. Now that you've got it rendered, you can see that the big stars are a little too big. They look kind of ridiculous, and the small ones could be a little smaller. So let's go here. I'm going to set this back to 0.6. I turned it up. So now you're wondering, what about extra detail? So what we're going to be doing is, you'll notice this is the noise texture, and you remember we changed its vector to actually get this spin effect. We can continue editing its vector, or we could even edit this gradient texture's vector. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drag this back, and we'll create kind of a new object. Go Texture, and Noise Texture. Then we'll go Color, Mix RGB. Don't add it there, add it right here, and then mix that in. Things are already going a little crazy, and it looks very cool. It looks almost like a wet paint. There's lots of other things you could set it to, maybe overlay or soft light, which would be just a simpler version, a laid-back version of overlay. I think I'm going to actually keep it at overlay for the moment. Then I'm going to just chill this out. I'm going to set this node also to be red, just to remember in the future, if we want to ever relax the noise effect, to just come here and edit this node. I am going to add in a texture coordinate, plug this into here, and then just duplicate this. That way it's sort of messing with its own vector. And these are both set to the same scale. If you kind of offset the scale a little bit, you can see the different effects that it gives you. I'll turn it up maybe just a little, and then I'll also give it some distortion here. Yeah, so now you've added sort of more detail to your galaxy, and maybe we will edit this as well. Control-Shift-D. Let us plug this into the top socket and this into here. That way we're editing the really bright spot in the middle as well. So you can see that's pretty neat. Another cool thing we could do is select all of these, move them out of the way, Control Shift D this noise texture and turn its scale up to maybe 0.8. And then we can go color, mix RGB. I'll mix this here. Plug that in there and mix overlay. Crank this up. Then I'll add in another color ramp. Whoops. Crank this up. Maybe we'll set this to 5. And then choose maybe overlay. And there you go. We've added a bunch more detail in our galaxy. Alright, so the next thing you need to do is actually color this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a color, mix RGB, set it to color, turn it up, and we need to add in another gradient texture like this, except it needs to be one that hasn't had its vectors edited. So let's add in a texture, gradient texture, hit Control T, and I'm going to set this to, let's see, what was this one? That's 0.08. So set this to 0.08 and just leave this at 1. Then plug this into the object. We don't want it in generated. Make sure to set this to spherical or else it won't work. Then plug this into here. Nothing's going to change, but if you add in a color ramp, you can map some colors to it. So let's say we make, let's just add some test colors in. I'm going to set this to red and this to blue. So you can see that's working. We've got red out here and blue towards the center. Maybe we'll choose some more realistic colors now. Choose like a dark blue. Get like a cyan towards the middle. And then here we'll go, you know, orangey red. Yeah, that's not horrible. Apparently I'm not good at picking galaxy colors. I'll set this to B-spline. Yeah, that's way better. So then I'll just give this texture a little more leeway. And this thing right here needs to be a little brighter. We'll set this to 2. Something like that. One thing that you can do if the center is not bright enough, or if, I should say if you don't have enough contrast, is you can use this gradient texture in there and set this to, I think, color dodge. Yeah. So that's given us a lot more contrast. It's real bright in the middle. Not much has changed out here. Nice. So let's go ahead, go to our render this out. And you can see how incredibly fast this renders. Now, one thing that I really enjoy is the liquid, kind of the watery look that this galaxy has. Now, I really do recommend that you continue to work on this to get it exactly how you want it. Remember, you can change any of these settings. Do not be afraid to just mess around with it and just do, you know, do whatever comes to mind. Yeah, see that? That's freaking cool. So when you're ready, go ahead and do your final render. I'm going to set mine to 200%, and then I'm going to go and turn on denoising data, just in case. Go ahead and render this, and you can see that looks very cool. We've got our stars in here. They are not nearly as bright as I would like, but you can always go back and turn those up. And I do think the middle is a little blown out. Maybe I'll actually change that real quick. What you can do is you can turn the color dodge here down a little, which I will, and then you can crop this down. And that looks pretty decent. I'm going to go to the compositor, hit use nodes, Control Shift click, add the viewer node up here, and then hit V a few times to zoom out. Filter, denoise, let's get rid of all the noise if we can, plug that into the composite. And you can see that the stars survived. However, if they were much smaller, they definitely would not have. Then I'll add in a filter, blur, set that to fast Gaussian relative. I'm going to choose X and then set this to maybe 8. Add a color, mix. I'm going to choose add here. Add that on top and turn this down. That looks pretty ridiculous, so let's see if we can turn this up to 12 and flip that around. That is much, much better, and you can add the final cherry on top, which is my favorite lens distortion. Set these both to maybe 0.03. Very nice. There is your galaxy. Now I definitely go back through and just change a couple of things. For instance, I do think the extra detail noise is too high, too strong, and maybe I would frame this a little differently. However, that is it, and you can see how ridiculously fast that rendered. It's just emissive shaders, which means you don't have too much to calculate. Anyways, that is it. That was way more simple than I expected to be able to create a galaxy. I mean, I expected you to have to use just loads of particle systems, all sorts of shaders, maybe some fancy modeling. But nope, all in the shader editor pretty easily. It can be tricky to manage that many nodes. However, if you work at it, you will get used to it, and it is very, very cool how many things you can do with nodes, just like this. I suggest you mess around with it and see what you can do. Heck, maybe you could use this spinning texture to upgrade your black hole, which I think would look very cool. And that's basically it. If you get the chance, I would love to see you in the Iridesium community. Just join with the link in the description, and if you make a cool galaxy render, post it there. That would be absolutely awesome. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time. This is Iridesium.